We got the worst country music out of the way. Last video I talked about my favorite country songs, which means today it is time for the biggest video of the year, my top 10 country albums of 2022. There were a lot of tough decisions here, which is actually why this video is late. It was gonna go up perfectly on time like the other videos, but then I started second guessing myself. I was like, can I do that? Is that breaking a rule? I also got sick, so please mind my voice. But better late than never. I am finally here to present to you my top 10 country albums of 2022. There were a lot of fantastic albums this year. I had well over 20 albums in consideration for this list, and especially that 10 to 7 range was like a revolving door of albums that all could have taken those spots. It was really competitive this year, but I finally have narrowed it down and solidified my top 10. I preface each list video by saying this, but again, this is just my opinion. It is no more correct than yours. These are just the albums I enjoyed the most, I found myself going back to, saw the most artistic value in, caused me to feel the most, brought the most emotion out of me, because ultimately I think that's what good music should do. And I'm emphasizing that point before this video because I am aware this may be a controversial list. But hey, that's the beauty of subjectivity and discussion. We can talk these things out. However, if you'd rather just throw a hissy fit at some 18-year-old Canadian kid because I put Kelsey Ballerini on this list over Gabe Lee, you are welcome to do that in the comments below. Just know the rest of us will be talking it out like adults. With that in mind, at number 10, I have Kelsey Ballerini's Subject to Change. I loved this album. Talk about coming into full form. That is exactly what Kelsey did on this project, bringing forth the best version of her pop country style, as well as a refreshing amount of surprisingly country songs. In the lead up to this album, she kept saying how this was going to be her most country album yet, but Kelsey became one of the few artists to actually follow through on that claim, bringing forth easily her most country album yet. But more importantly, I think this was her most authentic album yet. This album felt like Kelsey making the music she wanted to make, rather than some label telling her which music will do the best. If You Go Down, I'm Going Down Too sounds like a Dixie Chicks song in the style of Kelsey Ballerini. You're Drunk, Go Home with Kelly Clarkson and Carly Pearce feels like a female version of a Brooks and Dunn song from the 90s. I Can't Help Myself is an obvious nod to Shania Twain back in the day, but Kelsey always manages to add her own flavor to it, preventing it from feeling derivative. But then you've also got songs like Muscle Memory, which is pop country at its shimmering best, while songs like Marilyn act as a reminder of just how good Kelsey's writing is. Following that, at number 9, I have Ben Burgess and his debut album, Tears the Size of Texas. You'll be crying tears the size of Texas. Ben absolutely stormed onto the scene this year and wasted no time making some pretty big waves in the lead up to his debut album. And boy did it ever live up to my lofty expectations and then some. This album is ambitious and bold. The only duller moments are the songs that aren't reaching as far as the others. But then when I take a step back and put it into context against his competitors, the duller moments on Ben's album are pretty thrilling compared to a lot of the competition. This album is nice and concise and to the point. 10 songs, 38 minutes, in which Ben really touches all the bases, from rock to blues to folk, even some hints of R&B at times, all dressed up in a Western cowboy country style. Even amongst all the fantastic albums this year, Tears the Size of Texas managed to separate itself as this splash of new Western color I didn't know I needed until I got it. Next up at number 8, I've got one most of you probably haven't heard of, so let me introduce you to Bo Armstrong and his fantastic album, If Your Tired Heart Is Aching. On top of most likely being the least known album on this list, it's also the newest. It dropped at the end of November right as I was beginning to prepare myself for the year-end content. This album is everything you need and nothing you don't. It's a brief 10-track album, 2 of those songs being transitional interludes, combining for a runtime of 31 minutes. But that's the beauty. There's no fats, no skips. For 31 minutes, you are getting the highest quality alternative folk country there is. The guitar work on this album is incredible, but so is the writing with its themes of love with emphasis on commitment and how Bo wants his romance to play out over time. In that way, the album feels very mature and thorough. This album's literally therapy. I'd encourage you to go give it a listen from front to back, but if I had to give you one suggestion, I would probably say the second track, Get It Right, which has always been my favorite. Then at number 7, it's the return of the king, Jon Pardi himself, as Mr. Saturday Night. In a way, this album feels like Jon Pardi just showing off how good he is. It's almost disrespectful how he just disappears for 3 years, then randomly comes back in Lainey Wilson bell bottoms and still completely outdoes everyone. Anything you can do, Jon Pardi can do better. From a production standpoint, as you'd expect from a Jon Pardi album, this thing is as good as it gets. The instrumentals are rich and full, the songs are all structured and paced so well. Everything you could possibly want can be found on this album. From teenage summer love songs to a bar song for every single mood, this album really does it all in spectacular fashion. Moving on to my number 6 album of the year, it's one of the buzziest releases from the last 12 months, and yes, I am talking about ERNEST and his breakout album, Flower Shops. If there were any doubts going into this project, Flower Shops proved ERNEST is much more than just another one of Morgan Wallen's songwriters. Establishing his own uniquely bluesy, steel-centered sound, with punchy writing solidifying himself as one of the most consistent writers in Nashville. With each song packed to the brim with hit power, while never coming at the expense of any detail or originality. There's just so many highlights on this album, but specifically that run of tracks 4 to 7, Feet Wanna Run, Comfortable When I'm Crazy, Flower Shops, and Did It With You. In my opinion, that is one of the strongest runs any album had all year. And beyond the mesmerizing, infectious sound and production on this album, I think it's deceptively detailed and mapped out lyrically, with each song reading as a chapter in a relationship that you get to follow from start to end. If you missed that the first time, go back and you'll see how each song is interwoven. It's really quite neat. Then at number 5, I've got my Mobile Boys' Muscadine Bloodline and their stunner, Dispatch to 16th Ave. For some reason, this album seemed to slip under a lot of people's radars back in February. It didn't carry the same buzz a lot of their latest singles have, which has never made sense to me because I think the world of this album. The running themes of emergency response lend themselves to so many clever puns and double entendres. Lyrically, one of the wittiest albums of the year for sure, but also musically, I think it is one of the most enjoyable albums of the entire year because of how it flows. Each song blends into the next so seamlessly you don't even notice the next song has started, which is a technique a lot of R&B artists, often rappers, will use on some more nocturnal psychedelic production, most recently on Metro Boomin's latest album, most notably on The Weeknd's latest album. But hearing that in a country context just opened my eyes and made me wonder why more artists aren't doing this. Because thanks to those transitions, if you start this album, it's hard to turn it off. These songs are like scenes in a movie as opposed to episodes in a TV show. You can get up and go do something after an episode of a show finishes, but you're not going to pause a movie mid-scene and come back to it a few days later. Number 4 comes from an artist that I never thought would ever land this high on one of my albums lists, but here we are at number 4. I have El Paso by KOBY. And tell me why I'm feeling this way. Historically, I've never been a big fan of KOBY and his whole emo Texas party rock attitude, but as we learned in El Paso, I guess Ko wasn't a big fan of that either. This is easily one of the most vulnerable albums of the entire year, with Ko exploring his distaste for the very lifestyle he spent his whole career building up. Songs like Cabo provide a gruesomely unfiltered view into the rock star lifestyle Ko has leaned into over the last several years, and the shame he carries as a result of his choices. Along with the shameful career retrospectives, there's also a healthy helping of KOBY's trademark lovesick tropes, but this time even those songs seem to come with some added depth, like the beautiful acoustic ballad 3 Weeks, which is Ko reflecting on a past relationship that was awfully toxic, but in a strange way, he misses it despite all the harm it brought onto both parties. Easily one of the most riveting projects of the entire year, executed to a T, and very well deserving of my number 4 spot. And with that, we are down to my top 3, but before we hop onto the podium, gotta give a shout out to some honorable mentions. These are the albums that were in consideration for this list, but narrowly missed out on a spot. The Last Resorts, Greetings From by Midland, We Were Cowboys by Cameron Marlowe, Humble Quest by Maren Morris, Faded Memories by William Beckman, Dallas to Fort Worth by Drake Milligan, The Hometown Kid by Gabe Lee, Palomino by Miranda Lambert, and Songs About You by Brett Eldridge. We can now move on to the top 3. Kicking us off with the bronze medal is another entry I did not see coming. It is Colby Cooper's latest album, Boy from Anderson County to the Moon. Admittedly, I've never been a big rock guy, especially on the country music spectrum. I generally find myself on the smoother, more harmonic end with neo-traditional acts like Midland, John PARDI, William Beckman, etc., etc., which is no shade to the quality of music, it's just simply preference. So naturally, a lot of Texas rock like Giovanni and the Hired Guns, Pecos and the Rooftops have never necessarily been up my alley, even if I see the appeal and objective quality. But then Kolby Cooper's new album came along and completely broke that cycle. I could not shut this album off. It was one of my most revisited albums of the entire year, and it just became my go-to when I didn't know what I was feeling. Similar to Flower Shops, every single song on this album feels like a hit in its own right, whether that's due to a catchy hook like Storm's Coming, a massive musical climax like Are We on Fire, some goofy, playful energy on the song Just a Door, or some beautiful writing about themes of family and fatherhood that we get on a song like Stars Fall Down. Every song has a standout feature that makes it worthwhile, and that's what makes this album so likable to me. There is no weak link. Despite not having a running story like Dispatch to 16th Ave or Flower Shops, the consistency of this album is what made it one of my favorites to listen to front to back. Just a fantastic album that I was completely obsessed with this year. Alright, runner-up, Silver Medal, my second favorite country album of 2022, is Zach Bryan's monumental release, American Heartbreak. About time that I left Austin, about time you settled down. Zach Bryan's rise in 2022 from buzzy songwriter making music part-time to household name while remaining completely independent was so rare and inspiring it almost felt like an honor to simply witness. And I don't think he could have exploded with a more fitting album than American Heartbreak, this enormous 34-song project that showed off Zach's talent as a songwriter, storyteller, and poet. But this time around, it wasn't just Zach recording himself in a barn. We got to hear Zach's music brought to its full commercial potential in a studio setting, and it didn't disappoint whatsoever. This album has all-time classic written all over it and was a massive step for independent country, proving just how big of an audience there is for this raw, emotional folk Americana storytelling. And with that, we have arrived at my number one pick. This is where, if there is controversy, it's gonna sprout up. So hear me out. At number one, I have Noah Kahan's Stick Season. You got all my love, I'm still out here with the... I briefly mentioned this during the inclusion of Noah on my top country songs list, but I really went back and forth with myself over the inclusion of this album, and this is the decision that ultimately held up this video for so long, simply because it is the most country adjacent album on this list and also happens to be number one. I still don't know how this choice will be received, but at the same time, it would feel morally wrong to exclude what is by far my favorite album in this corner of music, so if you disagree with my verdict, this is me acknowledging that I understand where you're coming from. But the more I boil it down to its core, the more justified this decision seems. This is a folk-inspired singer-songwriter album about Noah's rural upbringing in the valleys of the East Coast, with the album musically being led by the acoustic guitar, banjo, and mandolin. But that's enough music politics. I just wanted to get that out of the way and try and explain where I'm coming from in case you disagree with Noah's inclusion on this list. Now let's talk about this album because it is nothing short of stellar. Alongside being near perfect, it is also the album that resonated with me the most in 2022. Stick Season is an album all about transition, but more specifically Noah's struggles to transition, and he uses Stick Season, that awkward period between fall and winter when everything's dead and dry, as a metaphor for the weird limbo he finds himself in personally. He talks about wanting to leave home and never come back like many of those around him did, but he feels this deep connection to his hometown that seems to stop him every time. And the album is this nostalgic journey through Noah's life up until this point, the relationships, the events, the environment that made him who he is today. But now he's sitting here in the present feeling left behind due to the fact that he can't seem to move on. And that whole sentiment of feeling behind and stuck is what really landed with me this year as I transitioned out of high school and chose to stay back to try and figure my stuff out while everyone else went away. And musically, this thing is absolutely stunning. It's theatrical and grand, yet intricate and pretty. This is the best production on any album I heard all year. Noah's vocals and melodies grab your attention and never let go. And what's special is the way these instruments bring the lyrics and sentiments to life. Both the writing and production complement and depend on each other. They don't even feel like separate elements. The whole thing just feels like a cohesive musical expression. If you haven't listened to this album, it is an absolute must. Stick Season was not only my favorite country folk album of the year, but my favorite album all genres considered. If I had to send you off with my recommendations, I would say Orange Juice, Everywhere Everything, and then either Growing Sideways or All My Love. And that is all I've got for you guys today. Those were my top 10 country albums of 2022. With this video out of the way, I can finally direct all of my attention to this new year that awaits us. I'm super excited to see what 2023 has to bring. There's a lot to look forward to already, and it literally just started. As always, if you enjoyed this video, a like really does help me out. And if you're new and enjoy what you see, go ahead and hit subscribe. Hop along for the journey. 2023 is going to be a great year on the Overshore channel. And yeah, thanks for everything in 2022. Here's to 2023.